Welcome to the Spring 2013 Horace M. Albright Lecture in Conservation. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Keith Gillis, Dean of the College of Natural Resources and a professor of forest economics here. I'm sure that you're as eager as I am to hear from our distinguished guest speaker tonight, Dr. Sylvia Earle, a true pioneer in marine research. But before we begin, just a couple items. There will be time after the lecture for question and answer, and we'll have two runners running around with microphones. And please wait for the microphone to get to you. That it's a great crowd. Everyone here might be able to hear you, but many, many, many times the number of people in this room will end up watching the video of this event. And if you don't wait for the microphone, Dr. Earle will be answering a question that no one has any idea what the question was. So thanks if you'll wait for the microphone. And speak slowly and clearly when you get the microphone. And of course, I always say, I love questions rather than statements in question and answer, but it's time to silence the beasts, right? So the Albright Lecture Series has been going strong here on the campus for over 50 years. And today it continues as a wonderful tribute to Horace Albright and the many achievements in his life. As you know, Horace Albright was really the person to whom we owe the greatest debt for the establishment of the national park system. Really a remarkable gift to all of us that we will enjoy in perpetuity. Albright's lifelong dedication to conservation was, I think, evident in his activities even up to his last year of life in helping the University of California establish new pieces of the National Reserve System, a network of protected areas that goes throughout the state, areas that range from deserts to coastal tidal pools, from the Sierra Nevada to the wetlands. So it's in the spirit of Horace Albright's dedication to conservation from turf to surf that we are going to bring you Sylvia Earle's presentation on the quest for sustainable seas. And I can think of no better way to begin an event like this on a campus than to bring one of our alumni to the microphone, another ocean expert, Karen Garrison, who will introduce our speaker at greater length. Karen earned her master's degree from the Energy and Resources group here, and since graduating, we've been grateful for her annual support of the program as a loyal alumna. Karen co-directs the Oceans program on the Pacific Coast for the Natural Resources Defense Council, where she's worked for the last 25 years. Among her many accomplishments, she's helped secure improvements to California's fishery management, measures to rebuild the overfished rockfish stocks, and limits on destructive bottom trawling in sensitive habitats. She was instrumental in drafting and writing California's Marine Life Protection Act, a landmark law that produced the first comprehensive statewide network of safe havens for ocean fish and wildlife. She's deeply involved in the design of these networks, these Yosemites of the seas, leading the Natural Resources Defense Council's work with a wide array of citizens to negotiate the siting of protected areas up and down the California coast. She continues to be active in efforts to encourage public engagement and to use these areas as laboratories for learning. Karen serves on the Marine Protected Area Federal Advisory Committee and is an advisor to the National Ocean Economics Program. She's a founding member of Save Our Wild Salmon, a coalition of fishing conservation and business groups, and this year she received the Benchley Hero of the Seas Award. Thank you, Karen, for being here with us tonight.
Thank you, Dean Gillis. Can everybody hear me? And welcome, everyone. It's great to be here. Tonight, it's my great pleasure to introduce world-renowned oceanographer, Dr. Sylvia Earle. Sylvia is an explorer in residence at the National Geographic Society and former chief scientist at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. She's led over 100 underwater expeditions and written more than 175 scientific and popular publications. She's done pioneering research in the oceans with a special emphasis on marine plants and ecosystems and on developing the kind of technology needed to reach the deep sea. All this has won her high praise and more than a few titles. She's been called her deepness by The New Yorker and many of her friends. The National Library of Congress calls her a living legend, and Time magazine designated her the very first hero of the planet. And with good reason. She helped inspire George W. Bush's efforts to designate vast tracts of reefs and oceans in around American-controlled Pacific Islands as marine national monuments, limiting fishing, mining, and exploration for oil. When she won a TED Prize in 2009, she launched and still leads a global initiative supporting creation of networks of marine protected areas, hope spots, as she calls them, large enough to protect the blue heart of the planet. That prize hit the news as I was wrestling with relentless industry opponents of protected areas along the California coast, and Sylvia's success at drawing national and international attention to this issue really helped bolster our efforts at a time when we most needed that help. What truly stands out about Sylvia to me is not just that she contributes so much to ocean conservation and science, but that her extraordinary talents and skills are matched by heart, hope, and vision. She has a doctorate from Duke University as well as numerous honorary doctorate degrees. She's just back from a trip to the Maldives, and I'm excited to hear about that tonight. And when she's not traveling the globe, she lives right here in the East Bay. Please join me in welcoming the esteemed and inspiring Dr. Sylvia Earle.
Thank you, Karen, and thanks to all of you for being here this evening to celebrate the ocean and this magic time that we all share. I consider this to be the sweet spot in time. I'll give you the bottom line of what I'm going to say tonight. But first I have to tell you that, like Karen, I have a special place in my heart for University of California at Berkeley, yay! I'm not an alum here, but my daughter, Elizabeth Taylor, is, and she runs a company over in Alameda, Deep Ocean Exploration and Research. That's a clue. Building little submarines and robots and manipulators, including the manipulator arm that was on the submarine that went with Jim Cameron down to the deepest place in the ocean. A little piece of California was a part of that great expedition a year ago, right now. The other thing I wanted to say is that you forgot one of my titles, Sturgeon General. I made such a fuss about fish when I was the chief scientist at NOAA that everybody started calling me the Sturgeon General. Somebody has to speak for the fish. Karen does, I do. I hope the rest of you will too. I mean, somebody has to speak up for the creatures that live in the sea because they don't vote. They're at the table, well, really they're on the table. We need to put them at the table. And so that's part of what I want to share with you tonight. The sweet spot in time, I'll come back to that, but think about it. There are plenty of reasons for despair, but there are even many more reasons for optimism and for hope, because now we know we've got a problem. We have a problem. The real problem would be if we didn't know. But as never before, we have knowledge that we could not have when I was a kid. We could not have it. We didn't have satellites up in the sky. We didn't have this network of communication. We didn't have access to the deep sea. A lot of things have come into focus. I think we've learned more since the middle of the 20th century than during all preceding history put together on every front that you can think of, but certainly it's true of the ocean. When Rachel Carson wrote The Sea Around Us, published in 1951, her attitude, although she knew the land was in trouble and she spoke eloquently about it, commented in ways that suggested that the ocean was too big to harm, too big to fail. Everybody thought that. Our job was to go catch the fish. Our job was to extract the, quotes, resources from the sea. And we did. We have. At the same time that we have learned more about the ocean, the existence of mountains down the Atlantic, Pacific, Indian Ocean, the greatest formations geologically on Earth. They're underwater. More volcanoes by a lot underwater than there are above. Things that we just could not know. We didn't know, could not know that there was life in the deepest sea until people actually went there for the first time in 1960, the second time in 2012. I mean, big gap. You know, a lot more footprints on the moon than there are submarine prints on the bottom of the ocean, but we're getting there. Now we know. And now that we know that we have the power to alter the nature of nature, and now that we know that the natural systems keep us alive, it's our life support system that we're monkeying around with, there's no turning back in terms of this point in time going forward to solve this problem. How do we find an enduring place, call it sustainability if you will, an enduring place within the natural systems that keep us alive? That's the biggest challenge of our time. There are a lot of challenges, little pieces that come together, but the bottom line is we've got to figure out how to make it work. There's 7 billion of us now. There were only 2 billion when I arrived on Earth. I watched population triple, and the planet doesn't get any bigger. It's the same old planet. And in fact, we've drawn down the assets during this special point in history. But now we know. And that's what gives reason for hope. So, thumbs up. I mean, that's what this picture is about, but I'm going to start with something else, actually, once I can learn how to drive this. Nope, sorry. Oh dear, I can drive submarines. And I need to figure out how to get back to the beginning. Can somebody help me? Let's see, I'll go to escape. How's that? There we go. I think I'm okay. Yes, I think I'm fine. Except that, not quite.
Just minimize right there.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
This is going to go great on film.
There's all the stuff.
All right. Thank you. I want to start with one of the best reasons for hope that now we know. We have this view of ourselves from space. Well, from Google. But kids walk around with this in their pocket. It's on your iPhone, it's on your cell phone, whatever kind of phone you have, laptop, desktop, iPad, whatever. We can see ourselves in ways that none of our predecessors before kind of the latter part of the 20th century, we are armed with knowing that this is it, this little blue speck in a really unfriendly universe. As far as we know, well, anytime in the near future, or even maybe the distant future, we've got to come to grips with making it work here. And it gets harder because we are changing the nature of the systems that keep us alive. So a year ago, I got to go to Davos, to the World Economic Forum in the mountains of Switzerland, and try to make a case for why it matters that we take care of the ocean. Sound economy is dependent on the sound environment. Or, as Tim Wirth has famously said, the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. It just is. That whatever it is that we do is dependent on taking care of the place, fundamentally. Well, I want to take you to a place in the Atlantic Ocean that inspired me as a kid in a book called Half Mile Down by William Beebe, who dived off the coast of Bermuda in the Sargasso Sea with his engineer colleague, Otis Barton, who designed a beautiful system called the bathysphere that enabled them to go where whales go almost every day. You know, at least they can, a half mile down. Nobody had been there before and come back. Lots of people have been there before and they're still there. But, but William Beebe and Otis Barton, here they are crammed into this little sphere. In the 1930s, I mean, this made history. This is like going to the moon. This is access to a place that we couldn't get to prior to the development of the technologies that made access possible. We are the beneficiaries of that clever engineering. And more than that, the vision that we can do this. Not only can we do this, we must do this. We must understand the blue part of the planet. After all, it dominates the world, governs the way the world works. And the ocean, clearly, it's not just salt water. There's a lot of salt water out there, but it's filled with life. Microbes, jellies, crustaceans, the spectrum of life on Earth, it's all there in the ocean in some form or another, either living or in the fossil record. The ocean is where the action is. That much I discovered as a kid, like probably every kid, just curious about what makes the world go round. And I read about how creatures in the sea flash, sparkle, and glow through the words of William Beebe in Half Mile Down, and I just knew I wanted to go see for myself. It's taken a long time for me to kind of get there where Beebe was so long ago, but I'm going to go back down to that image that we started with once I figure this out. I will figure this out. Let's see. I see the X. I need a 10-year-old up here, please. How about this one? Berkeley. How about that original image? There we are. How about going full screen? Oh, did the wrong thing. Oh my goodness. Turn the cameras off. Wait a minute. We did it. Thumbs up. So, my grandparents, even my parents, but my grandparents in particular, couldn't see what this kid is seeing because face masks and snorkels and fins, flippers, didn't exist in the 1800s. But by the time that my parents came on board in the 20th century, and certainly when all of us came on board in that same century, or some of you in the more recent century perhaps, but now we have technology that gives us access beneath the surface. One book that I recommend to all of you, if you haven't already scooped it up and made it your own, is The Social Conquest of Earth by one of my heroes, E.O. Wilson, who describes what is it about human beings that set us apart, that give us an edge. Part of it comes, of course, from our big brains and our opposable thumbs and things like that, but it's the accumulation of knowledge that gets passed on from generation to generation to generation. And now we have the ability to share knowledge all over the world in a flash. When our numbers were really small and populations were isolated, even so, human civilization advanced slowly over thousands of years with language, with knowledge, with the ability to gather and record history, engineering that just built on one discovery after another. And here we are at this sweet spot in time, as never before, knowing what we know, as never again having a chance to use that knowledge to set a course for ourselves that could be, should be, must be an enduring place within the natural systems that really make our lives possible. Knowing that the natural systems matter, that the ocean matters, is the key. We have historically thought of the ocean as a great place to catch things, fish, to eat, or a great place to throw things. Do you know the phrase deep six? You know, you throw it in the ocean, then it's away. But now we know there is no away, that everything that we put anywhere is still there. And plastics that have come up in the last half century or so. As Jackson Browne sings in a song that he composed a couple of years ago, every bit of plastic that ever was is still here. It's still here. It'll be here for a long while. The other line in Jackson Browne's song, the same song actually, is, if I could be anywhere in time, it would be now. It would be now. I mean, think about it. I'd love to go back and see what my parents were doing as kids. I'd love to go back and see what dinosaurs were like up close and personal. Maybe not too personal, but, you know, to see what the world was like then. Or to zoom forward in time. Having that, we have the gift of being able to do that through our computers, to be able to take the information that we've got and calculate, if we do this, here are the spectrum of possibilities. Which way do we want to go? How can we write an insurance policy for the future based on what we do right now? Our prosperity right now has relied on all of those who have lived prior to us. But never has there been a time as important as the present time to get it right. And I say that not just as a wild guess, but knowing that, as I will talk about a bit more as we go through these images, the climate is changing. We're pushing the fast forward button. Climate has always changed over time, but we're accelerating the process through what we're putting into the atmosphere, through the destruction of the natural systems that would normally hold the planet steady, like the forests, like the ocean, the carbon cycle, the oxygen cycle, the water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the sulfur cycle. It all anchors back to taking care of the natural systems that provide these things that only now are we beginning to understand and to see why it matters, and to see that we not only have the capacity to change these great cycles of what makes the planet work, but we are changing them. We did it in ignorance up until about now. But now we know, and we can't go back now that we know. I've had the joy of spending thousands of hours under the ocean, and it doesn't matter where you are in life, you too should get busy and go jump in if you haven't already. And if you have already, just keep doing it. It's our blue planet after all. And we have the capacity to do it in ways that our predecessors could not. My mother waited until she was 81 to put on the mask and fins and slide into clear blue warm water off Bonaire. And she scolded me afterwards, saying, "Why didn't you get me in the ocean sooner?" You know, I thought I had tried, but I clearly didn't try hard enough. So I don't want you to scold me for not trying hard enough. Do it, you know? It's easy. I know it's cold and it's murky off the coast right here. But even if this is the only place you can go to get wet, do it. You'll see critters out there. Go to Monterey, go to Hawaii, go down to Baja California, or do whatever it takes. Put it on your bucket list. And if you just don't like to get wet, and there are some little kids and big kids too who just don't like to get wet, or they can't because they got ear problems or whatever it is, get a submarine or go hop a ride on one of the submarines. Or do what I did, start a company to build submarines, but don't let that be an excuse. This is the time. Got to go get acquainted with life on this planet. I gave the Fish and Wildlife Service a hard time about a year ago when they asked me to come speak to them. I said, you should just call it the Wildlife Service. What is this fish and wildlife? Fish are wildlife. So, you know, get with it. Like birds, fish in the sea are part of what makes the system go. They aren't just tasty, although I have an uncle who used to be a market hunter of birds. We used to think all birds were just destined for our plates. 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie, you know? Nursery rhymes about how birds were delicious taken from the wild. Now we see birds differently. We value them alive. And yes, people go take ducks and geese. Ducks Unlimited has protected the areas so they can go catch ducks and geese once in a while, but not with bulldozers, not to fill, you know, tractor trailers with wild birds. We used to do that with buffalo, with a lot of wild things from the land, and we realized that there are limits to what we can take. We haven't quite faced up to that yet for the ocean. We're getting there, though, and hoorah for California, a leader in understanding that if you want to have fish either alive or on your plate, you have to take care of the breeding areas, the feeding areas, the connectors, the migration routes, and California rocks. We have some help right up here in the front row. Thank goodness we have legislators who stand up for the ocean and stand up for protected areas. NRDC has been a champion for that, other organizations as well. The idea that we need to consciously, proactively provide safe havens in the ocean for the wildlife, just as we must proactively provide safe havens on the land. Horace Albright was a champion for that. Teddy Roosevelt using the Antiquities Act and his power as president to make big things happen on the land. We now have to make big things happen in the ocean while there is still time. And this is the great message that I hope you'll go home with, that we've got to use all the powers that we have to explore the ocean, understand it, and then do everything we can to take care of it. It's been doing its part, taking care of us throughout all of our history. So now we know we can go splash into the ocean. And going down as divers, breathing compressed air or holding your breath, we can have access to the sunlit upper portion of the ocean. I have a friend in Hawaii, Richard Pyle, who uses a rebreather system. It's a kind of souped up scuba system. You don't make bubbles, you just recycle the air the way astronauts do. He goes down to between 300 and 500 feet and finds, he says, about a dozen new species of fish per hour. To just indicate how little we know about the twilight zone, that space between where divers can go and where submarines can go, which is mostly in deeper water. But there's so much out there that we have yet to see. One thing we do know, though, is we're actually depleting many forms of life and have, without any question, caused the extinction of creatures that we will never get to know, because with the destruction of a coral reef, out goes all the life that's there. We don't, even before we get to know what the names are or their roles in the greater scheme of things, a reef is destroyed, or a kelp forest, or whatever it is that we now have the capacity to access. So going back a little bit in time, 1979, I had a chance to use this little personal submersible called the Jim suit, named after the first person willing to put it on, Jim Jarrett. That was in the 1920s. But the approach of having one atmosphere, you're protected inside, like getting into an airplane. You don't feel the pressure. The suit protects you from the weight of the water that presses in from all sides. I had a chance to go to 1,250 feet, about 400 meters off the coast of Hawaii. It was the first time that I had been in a personal submersible where I could control the system. I'd been in other submarines, but there you have a chauffeur. Somebody else is driving. I love a system that is so simple that even a scientist can do it. And this is one of them. And it really got me hooked on the idea of being able to explore the ocean as you go into a forest or any place else. Just you're self-contained. I had about 2.5 hours to walk around at 1,250 feet. It was amazing. If I had done that, breathing compressed air, it takes a couple of weeks to decompress from a dive of that depth. Unlike whales that can hold their breath and they don't take up the compressed gas in their system, they can come right back to the surface. But when we're breathing compressed air at that depth, it takes a long time to dispel the nitrogen from our system so we can safely return. So that led to starting a company right here in the Bay Area, Deep Ocean Engineering, Deep Ocean Technology, 2 companies, with the idea of building underwater robots and personal submersibles. So Deep Rover got launched in the 1980s. This is 1986. I'm on my way down to 1,000 meters. Oh my gosh, off San Diego. It was the deepest solo dive. There were 4 of us who did it. Bruce Robeson from Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, the designer of the system, Graham Hawkes, and Phil Newton, who purchased the first Deep Rover. There are actually only 3 of them in existence. The other 2 take 2 people, but the fact is, you want a submarine, start a company, build one, go to your garage, It's there to be done. As they say, well, rocket science it isn't, but it's not something that you take lightly, but you can do it. The knowledge is there. Phil Newton, that same Phil Newton who bought the first Deep Rover, said, that's a nice system. It's small, it's transportable, but let's shrink it down and make it even smaller. And he came up with this design for the Deep Worker. Again, so simple, even a scientist can operate it, and I'm living proof. And I'm not alone. There are about 50 scientists who, in the course of the 5-year Sustainable Seas expedition, they came here to work off the coast of California, to look at the marine protected areas, the marine sanctuaries, to get school kids to write projects and engage their minds thinking about this. This started in 1998, the big year of the ocean. Well, every year should be the year of the ocean, should be like the millennium of the ocean. The ocean really should be front and center all the time. But in any case, we explored right here in our blue backyard in California and all around the coastline of this country and down into Mexico and Belize over that 5-year period, thanks in large part to a gift from the Goldman Foundation across the bay, who thought it was a great idea to support research, education, conservation, and exploration. So we used that opportunity through the National Geographic to put that program into work. And those little submarines have been busy doing things all over the world since then, up in Alaska, looking at the tracks that trawlers make when they go across, scraping the ocean floor. It's one thing if you don't know the damage you're causing, but now we know. We've had eyes and cameras down there seeing when you bulldoze the ocean floor, there are consequences. Like, duh. But we didn't really know. Now, it's time for a change, and there are changes underway now that the knowledge is there that, we just can't treat the ocean as if it's an endless source of groceries. We've seen a decline of many of the fish in the sea by 90%. Bluefin tuna that people love when they go to eat sushi or sashimi. Well, the latest word from the Pacific is that they're 96% gone. And that's happened since the middle of the 20th century. When I was chief scientist at NOAA, the numbers for the Atlantic were 90% gone. Well, that was in 1990. And the figures represented a mere 20 years. 90% drop in 20 years. It really woke me up because I didn't know. But I do now. And now I'm an evangelist for tuna. Like, they're more important out there swimming in the ocean than they are swimming with wasabi or lemon slices and butter, whatever. Maybe someday we'll be able to munch on a few again, but right now, with so few left, do we want it to happen on our watch that we will be the last ones to say, salute bluefin tuna as they swim over the horizon? I don't think so. I think we should be the heroes to say, give them a break. Let's go to the Gulf of Mexico where we know there's a spawning area and protect it. Because it's not just good for the tuna, it's good for the ocean, and that means it's good for us. To follow the example of California that has looked for where are the breeding areas, where are the feeding areas, where are the nursery areas, let's protect them. And that's the good news. These variations on the theme of little subs can, you can have one person drive, you can be chauffeured if you really don't want to drive. Little submarines are coming into their own. I love this one. It's down in Costa Rica. Cocos, you can buy a ticket and go down 500 meters beneath the surface to the edge, beyond the edge of the twilight zone. You can go down where it's really dark, even in broad daylight. The pilot sits in the back and two lucky ducks get to sit in the front in this bubble that enables you to see the ocean dry, no decompression. Well, I really do like to get wet, but here the fish look at you from the outside in. Sadly, this country is kind of losing its heart with respect to supporting the technologies that will enable us to explore the ocean for science, even for recreation, but science in particular. So Alvin is our one wonderful submersible that is now being reconfigured to go ultimately to 6,000 meters. That's a little more than half the ocean's depth. But it's still on the block, waiting to get back into business, maybe this summer, after time out to get reconfigured, after amazing lifetime starting in 1964. What were you doing in 1964? Most of you probably weren't born then, but that's when Alvin began exploring the ocean. This is the Pisces sub in Hawaii. There are two of them, capable of going to 2,000 meters. That's more than a mile, of course. The Pisces subs could have been deployed to go down to the Deepwater Horizon site in the Gulf of Mexico, to the actual wellhead. But they said, we're here, can we go, please, can we go? No, somehow it never happened. Only the Alvin later was able to go in the vicinity of the wellhead. To date, no independent view of the wellhead has been made by scientists who would certainly love to get in there and see what's actually happening at the site of that spill. Well, the Pisces subs have been in business now for a long time. They probably have another 20 years of useful life, but they're being zeroed out of our budget with NOAA, the agency that supports underwater research activities to a large extent. So, it's like Abraham Lincoln said, if the public is with you, anything's possible. If the public isn't with you, nothing's possible. If the public is a voice to say, we need to have Pisces back in business, we need to have submarines out for scientists to use to explore the ocean, we need eyes in the sea, it'll happen. But people are quiet. They don't even know that this is an issue. But you know now. So maybe you will be a voice for the deep sea crabs that are out there who don't vote. But they certainly are part of the world that we enjoy the benefits of their existence. I don't mean on a plate necessarily, although some people enjoy them on a plate. How about deep sea corals? Off Hawaii, there are species of coral, gold coral, for example, that are thought to be the oldest living animals on Earth, 7,000 years. What was the world like 7,000 years ago when some of these corals settled out and started to set up housekeeping on the ocean floor? The world was a very different place, but they're still there, still there. The last thing we should be concerned about with them is making jewelry out of them. But some people do, of course. They don't realize how special it is to have these creatures out there as a part of our living history. I mean, we didn't know about the bristlecone pine until borer samples were taken. And actually, one scientist notable for cutting down one of the oldest bristlecone pines ever, just to see how old it really was. Actually, one of the dark moments in botany, what can I say? This is such an exciting time. We're in the space age. We take for granted that people can ride rockets to go up into space. We have a space station up in the sky. When I was a kid, nobody imagined that was possible. Going to the moon was like, it was like Mars, going to Mars is today in a sense. Although I think people have the sense that since we can go to the moon, we surely ought to be able to go to Mars, or why not set up housekeeping anywhere in the universe? Well, it's not as easy as it looks, of course. First, you should have an ocean if you want to have a place in the universe that works for us. This submersible, one of the 2 Mir subs, is one of a fleet of submersibles that Russia now has to explore the ocean. They have actually 6 submersibles that can go to 6,000 meters. China has one that goes to 7,000 meters. France has a 6,000 meter sub. India is building one. And of course, Russia has 2. The United States, until Alvin gets back in business and reconfigured to go to 6,000 meters, we have none. We have none. We were the first to actually get out there, down there. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Japan has a sub that goes to 6,000 meters. I've had a chance to ride in that sub. It's a great little system. But, you know, let's get busy. And here at this university, great engineering school, and around the country, around the world, the talent exists. We need to solve the problem of glass submarines, to build spheres that will resist the pressure at the deepest part of the ocean. So you can see out of the sun. Maybe like Star Trek V, we need that transparent aluminum, but barring that, let's have glass, a beautiful material. You have to get it exactly right, but then that's true of a whole lot of things. You have to get them exactly right. But it's there to be done. And I suspect that in the next 20 years, there will be glass spheres transporting people into the... But why wait for 20 years? Why not do it now? The US Navy and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and scientists who worked independently of the Navy down in San Diego, in the 1960s, were coming up with solutions that really pointed the way toward using glass. And across the bay, over there, no, this side of the bay actually, East Bay in Alameda, at Deep Ocean Exploration and Research, really looking at what it will take to build a 6,000 meter sub. I mean, come on over, check it out, give your advice. Meanwhile, having acrylic spheres, tried and true, the Johnson Sea-Link subs for decades transported scientists in clear spheres, but there are limits to what acrylic can do. The Johnson Sea-Link and the Deep Sea off Costa Rica and dozens of other little subs, they reach their maximum at about 1,000 meters. It's kind of the best you can do with acrylic. We need glass. I mean, we can put up with these tiny little portholes. That's what Jim Cameron did when he went to the deepest part of the ocean. But, you know, we can do better than that. There is a design at the bottom that employs glass. Remotely operated vehicles now we know can go to the deepest place. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution has sent a wonderful robot to the deepest place, the Mariana Trench, on, I guess, 9 different occasions. So in addition to having people, 3 people over a span of 52 years, and that one remotely operated system that's been down a dozen times, verifying what we thought was impossible when I was a kid. There's life at full ocean depth. Now, you know, I just have to slide this in here because it's across the bay. It's across the, you know, down the road a piece, over there in Alameda. Systems that, again, are over the top, or rather under the top. This one goes under the ice in Antarctica. It goes through a 22-inch borehole in the ice and swims around 1 kilometer through the ice, just snooping around to look at what's there, equipped with 27 different instruments to bring back the news. It's one place that I guess I personally would rather not go in the ocean, slide through a 22-inch borehole and go under the ice and swim 1 kilometer back. I mean, there's a place for these robots, and there's a place for human beings. There's a place for all of these tools to get to know what's down there. Why do we need to know? Well, until people started to go in the 20th century, mostly the latter part of the 20th century, we were ignorant of the existence of hydrothermal vents, of the whole kingdom of life, the Archaea. And I think it spurred a great new era of excitement about the role of microbes in the ocean and in the world. Now we have a better understanding of what to look for, now that we've glimpsed the diversity and the abundance of life in the deep sea. If you look at the surface of the ocean, it kind of looks all the same. But when you get down under the surface, you see that the diversity, the different kinds of habitats, the different kinds of creatures that live there, it's the greatest diversity of life on Earth under the surface. Last summer, I had a chance to use this system, the Aquarius, also being zeroed out by NOAA, but it doesn't have to be zeroed out if enough voices say, we need to do this. We need to allow scientists to have the gift of time underwater. It's not just depth. It's not just to go under the ice. It's just to go and spend time. You know, divers know you have a stopwatch kind of experience when you dive into the ocean. If you go to 100 feet, 20 minutes, or you pay a penalty. So you have to be quick, and you don't get to see full experiences of what animal behavior is taking place if you mind the rules, and you have to mind the rules because your life depends on minding the rules. Well, with systems such as this where you live underwater for a week or a couple of weeks or whatever it is, some have stayed underwater for 2 full months using the ocean as a laboratory. I first did this in 1970, and I've done it now 10 times. Again, I heartily recommend it to all of you because it just enables you to see things differently, to be able to swim outside day or night, using some fancy new technologies that didn't exist the first time I did this in 1970. Now you can put a helmet on your head, and I talked to Fox News. I was a moment of zen on the Jon Stewart program. And I talked to school kids around the country while submerged 60 feet underwater. I could do it while wearing this helmet, looking at the fish and describing what I was seeing. Now, the best thing is to be there yourself. The next best thing is to look over somebody's shoulder and have the experience of vicariously exploring the ocean. This is just such a cool thing, you know. I couldn't really get my head around it myself when I first heard about having a hole in the floor of your underwater laboratory. I mean, why doesn't the water just come in and flood everything? But pressure inside keeps the water from burbling in to where the people are. And this is that magic mirror that you step into or through to get into the warm, dry interior where you have microscopes and books and bunks and a microwave oven and whatever it takes, like an underwater trailer where you sit for days at a time. One thing that clearly comes into focus, and any of you who've put on a mask and snorkel, let alone with scuba, you know it, with the first glimpse that the ocean is full of critters. It's alive. And the more you look, the more you see. Corals. One of my colleagues, fellow so-called Aquanauts last summer, Mark Patterson, had a special place in his heart, in his research, whatever, for corals. And there's a certain lump of coral that he has been following now for, I don't know, more than 10 years, because he's does a repeat performance using the ocean as a laboratory from the Aquarius underwater system. He even knows individual coral polyps because he's been spying on them for now 10 years. And he knows when a new one is, new area has come about. He puts little instruments. He doesn't have to take the coral, rip it out of the ocean, and put it in his laboratory. He takes himself into the ocean and uses the ocean as the laboratory, getting to know individual sponges, individual corals, let alone the individual fish. And this is one of the best studied sponges on the planet. They didn't have to take it to the laboratory. They took themselves, the scientists did, and wired it. They call the Aquarius the electric reef because it has so many instruments that spin out from this source of power underwater. The things that you see that you will never see, well, maybe if you go to the Monterey Aquarium or the aquarium of the Bay, you'll see some of the creatures that otherwise people don't get to see. Again, we live in an era of this explosion of being able to take slices of the ocean and bring them to people. I think of aquariums as halfway houses for fish and people to get acquainted. Not quite as good as being in the ocean yourself, but you know, there are people who don't like to get wet. Okay, go look at calamari in some places other than, you know, on your plate, and watch the calamari looking back at you. This is the ultimate calamari that just, you know, this year, for the first time, was seen in its own realm. Some dead ones or some have been seen or photographed near the surface that have been lured up from the depths, but to actually go into the depths, it was a good friend, Dr. Edith Witter, who's a specialist in bioluminescence. She thinks like a squid, and she has lured squid out of the depths of the Gulf of Mexico with a bioluminescent lure. I mean, many of these creatures in the deep sea have some form of making their firefly kind of light. And she figured, you know, if I get the right wavelengths and the right timing and the right intensity, maybe we can lure in some of these beasts, thinking like a squid. And she did that and found a new order, not just a new species or a new genus or a new family, but a new order of squids lured into the camera's lens in the Gulf of Mexico. And so when Discovery decided that they wanted, and NHK and some scientists as well, for good measure, from Japan, and Dr. Witter from this country, got together and used a bioluminescent lure, they actually were able to photograph the giant squid for the first time. It's, you know, to me, it's been a symbol of how difficult it is to explore the ocean. The creatures as big as a bus who have been eluding us all this time. What are we thinking? Why aren't we out there? Why aren't we down there? So let's go. They're even in the backyard of the Aquarius. Here's Mark Patterson again from the inside. And there I am looking out. And there are the fish looking in. It's just such a trip. I just invite you to, you know, let your voice be heard. We know we need to save these facilities so that, you know, the students here have a chance to go live underwater and get to see these creatures, like these big grouper that set up housekeeping within the structure of the underwater laboratory itself. It was actually when I first lived underwater in 1970 that I had this epiphany about fish. Because, I mean, like everybody else at the time, we thought thought the ocean was so vast that humans could not really harm it. Oh, maybe a little bit around the edges, but our job was to try to extract as much as we could from the ocean. Food from the sea. That's been a mantra that I have listened to for ages, but now we know. First of all, wildlife from the sea accounts for just a tiny fraction of the calories that feed people. If you peel back the layers, it's like 0.5% of wild creatures from the sea provide the calories for people around the world. 80+% come from corn, rice, wheat, and to increasing extent, soy. 13% of the calories come from animal sources, and 1% of that from wild creatures, about 0.5% from aquaculture, about 0.5% from wild-caught wild creatures. It just sort of rocks me back on my heels thinking, how are we going to feed 7, 8, 10 billion people? Well, we're not going to do it with ocean wildlife. When 90% of many of the creatures like the groupers, the snappers, tunas, swordfish, marlin, sharks, they're already depleted, and we want more? We've got to think differently. If we want any, we've got to protect breeding areas, feeding areas, nursery areas, And we have to take the pressure off to give them a chance to recover from years of taking too many. True with squids, true with lobsters, true with shrimp, true with all wildlife in the sea. And as a biologist, and what are biologists? What are scientists anyway? What are explorers? They're little kids who never grew up. I mean, what do kids do? They ask questions. What do scientists do? They ask questions. They have this sense of wonder. And it occurred to me somewhere along the line that maybe fish have a value that transcends pounds of meat. Along the way, we had that epiphany with whales. We've had it with birds. Why not with fish? They're all carbon-based units swimming around in the ocean, part of the food chain, part of the chemistry of the ocean. I mean, we need to look differently at life in the sea and at ourselves, and what's going to make it possible for us to sustain ourselves in a world that needs fish alive to make the ocean function. And besides, they have personality. Oh, by the way, I came to understand, living underwater that first time, and it gets reinforced time and again, fish have faces, and no two faces are exactly alike. I can imagine a fish swimming through this auditorium and glancing around and saying, oh, people, they all look alike. Because we kind of do, you know? But when you really look at us, there are no two people in this room, in this country, in this planet, now or ever, in the past or in the future, exactly alike. I mean, if you look at NCIS or just CIS or whatever it is, you know, look at the DNA. Every one of us is different. Every fish is too. Now we know. We didn't know that not so long ago. Is the best and highest use of these creatures just to eat them? I mean, some would say, if I'm hungry, you bet. And I agree with that. If you're really hungry, feeding coastal families and communities, it has gotten us to where we are, consuming wildlife over 10,000 years. We've done it. But we cannot feed 7 billion people on wildlife, not with lions and tigers, not with wild birds, not with monkeys or turtles or anything. We've got to come to grips with supplying enough calories to keep us in business without destroying our life support system, of which these creatures are elements. Never mind that they're beautiful. I mean, that's one good reason. Or that they're interesting. That they have attitude. They do. But fundamentally, we need them. We need them alive. We need trees. We need deserts. We need clean rivers. We need a planet that works. We need whale sharks, the biggest fish in the sea, swimming in the sea, not just pictures or stuffed animals in museums. We have a chance to maintain this spectrum of life, all of these elements that maintain a planet that works. But we're really good at killing creatures. Maybe that's in our DNA. Let's go kill something, you know? It's the joy of killing fish or killing birds or whatever it is. There's a deep-seated piece of us that wants to go catch something. But there are limits to what we can catch and still have a planet, still have an ocean, still have a life support system that works. And sometimes it's just a notion that we get, and not we necessarily in this room. It's not my personal notion that shark fin soup makes me sexier. But there is that attitude that has come up over the ages in certain parts of the world, and even here in California. But we have said no in this state, to protect sharks, to not ship shark fins around. This is progress. You know, marine mammals were once fair game, but we have come to see them differently. Not everybody does, but there is, you know, the weight of opinion, the voice of people. If people are with you, generally speaking, whales are protected. More of them are protected than not. And there is good news. There are more whales now than there were 10 years ago, at least some species. Others, we took right whales down to a level where their recovery is very much in doubt. But they're still here. They're still here, so there's still hope. Sperm whales. You know, it isn't just the species that counts, there's societies of animals that are probably more important intact societies, as with elephants or a lot of the creatures. It isn't just the species, it's the system. It's the social structure, it's the history. Or you can eat them. You have a choice. We have a choice. And that's what makes this the sweet spot in time. We still have a choice with bluefin tuna. There's still some out there. I mean, 4%, 3%, 10%, whatever it is, they're still there. There's all hope. All hope is gone for some species. And, you know, I worry about things like orange roughy that are still for sale in my local Lucky supermarket for $9.95 a pound. These creatures take 30 years to mature. They're a bit like the rockfish in here in California. Slow to grow, long-lived, and they taste good. But we never ate orange roughy until about 30 years ago. And once they were discovered 2,000 feet beneath the surface of the ocean, we really went after them, actually mostly in the southern hemisphere, New Zealand and Australia. And it was only after doing this for quite a while that it was discovered how long it takes for them to mature. 30 years before they can start making more orange roughy. We don't grow 30-year-old chickens or 30-year-old cows. Or we do have 30-year-old grapevines. That's okay, but we don't rely on them. And we cultivate them. We pay for the land. We really pay taxes on the land. These are wild creatures from the ocean that are thought of as free. If they belong to anybody, perhaps they should be regarded as the common heritage of all of us if it's wild. I mean, we have a chance now that we know. Coral reefs, you know, they are in trouble. About half gone since I was a kid, or in a serious state of decline. I've witnessed coral bleaching in many places around the world, something that nobody even thought of before about 1980, and the link is partly with global warming. Warming oceans mean that creatures such as many species of coral just cannot tolerate the prolonged period of warming. They lose their associated algae, the zooxanthellae. Sometimes they survive it, sometimes they don't. But it's a clear indication of stress. And many simply die. But it isn't just the warming trend, it isn't just acidification of the ocean, it's the dismemberment of coral reef systems and kelp forest systems and deep sea systems. You know, I think about San Francisco, it's not just about the buildings, or New York, or any place. The buildings matter, like the corals themselves, they're like the buildings, but you need the taxi drivers, you need the garbage collectors, you need the doctors, you might even need some lawyers. I don't know about that, but anyway. In the ocean, I don't know the counterpart, but I do know that you need the whole system, that the fish need the coral need the fish. It's a partnership, it's a system. And we have stripped many coral reefs. Protect the coral, don't touch the coral, but it's okay to kill the fish. It's not a recipe for success. Gulf of Mexico, one of the hardest working bodies of water in this country. We've taken shrimp, we've taken fish, we've taken oil and gas, we've put stuff in the Gulf of Mexico. We've let things flow down the Mississippi River. Actually, 40% of this country flows into the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, there's Mexico and Cuba adding to the mix. And images such as this have happened in my lifetime. The first oil rig went into the Gulf of Mexico when my parents first moved to Florida. I didn't see it. It was many years later. I came to understand that the Gulf of Mexico is rich in the very power sources that drive our civilization: oil, gas. And coal is another matter, but all of those fossil fuels together have brought us to this level of understanding that we now enjoy. I mean, I drove here in a car. It wasn't powered by whale oil. I look at Google Earth, I can see Earth from space. Rockets don't go up with anything other than the most refined fossil fuels that we can supply. We owe a great debt to the discovery and the use of technologies that have been anchored in what we thought of as abundant, cheap energy. But now, Now we know. Huh. Huzzah. There's a cost that we haven't accounted for when we say cheap energy, coal, oil, gas. Because now we see the consequences of what we put into the atmosphere and what we have been putting into the ocean. The floating golden forest of sargassum in the Gulf of Mexico was affected, generating oxygen, taking up carbon, providing habitat in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. But in the process, these creatures suffered greatly, as did many more conspicuous things like the pelicans. It isn't just things such as oil spills. It's obviously what we're putting into the ocean, like the discarded fishing nets that keep killing. We now can see what we could not see when we started doing some of these things not so many years ago. This is a good news picture because this turtle was found and released back to the sea free of its encumbrance. This is a great good news story out at the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. I mean, the bad news is all those nets were out there in the ocean. The good news is volunteers, kids, went out working with NOAA to retrieve these nets, and maybe they'll appear in a polar fleece near you. Who knows? Recycling some of these things. In fact, I gave a talk just a couple of weeks ago at Interface, the carpet company, that is now taking old fishing nets and turning them into pricey carpets. You can be a part of the solution by buying Interface carpets because, they're trying to actually become a carbon neutral company. Big problem, how anybody can do that, but they're trying to do their best. And part of it is to take a problem and turn a profit with that problem. Here we are, 10,000 years, 100,000 years ago. Earth has gone through some major ups and downs through the history of humankind. There have been people around on Earth during this whole time of shifts in climate, ups and downs, ups and downs. The last 10,000 years, though, when most of civilization has sort of reached a tipping point toward prosperity, toward this inexorable climb to a few million people, to 1 billion people by 1800, to where we are today. Looks like really good news for humankind until you know what we know, what 10-year-olds can now know, that Earth can change again. And when you fiddle around with our life support system, we don't really know the consequences, but we know it's probably not going to be in our best interest if temperature really climbs the way it looks as though it's headed for right now, or that sea level will rise, or that storms will get more intense, or who knows what. What we know is that's it. That's all there is. This little blue speck in the vast, unfriendly universe. And the good news is we have time because now we know. We still have sharks swimming in the ocean. There's still coral reefs out there. We still have choices available to us. And I am so pleased that you have chosen to come here tonight to spend a little bit of time thinking about these things. And right now, I welcome your questions. Thank you.
So why don't you take a seat? So we have a little bit of time for questions, and I'm not going to exercise my prerogative by being up here by asking them. So I do have two runners here with microphones, and so if you'd raise your hands, I'll just direct them and wait for the microphone and speak clearly, please. So who's got some questions?
You first one.
Oh,
come on.
Right. Well, actually, let's start here, Sasha. Okay, and then up front. Go ahead, please.
No one is addressing the radioactive problem that happened at Fukushima and its effects on the ocean. Do you have any information that you could share with us?
Well, I think people are looking at that issue. In fact, there was news that just came over, what else, the internet, about a week ago about the tunas that have been taken close to the area in Japan that have higher levels of radiation than are regarded as safe for human consumption. Nobody's worried about, is it safe for the tuna? But they should be worried about such
I
things.
think, wasn't the multiple on the order of 9,000 times?
Yeah, something
Yeah.
big,
Yeah.
not just a little bit more, but big. So, I mean, it is an issue, and again, the great cause for optimism is we have the power of finding this out. And people need to sort of demand that we use our powers to ask those very questions. Let's go get the answers.
Okay, back here.
Hi. Have you had any personal experience with Kevin Costner's machine that can separate the oil from the water from an oil spill?
I have not personally had experience with Kevin Costner's machine, but I do know that it's an example of private initiative, again, just getting in there and trying to solve a problem when you're frustrated that it's not happening otherwise. And I applaud his efforts, like I applaud Jim Cameron. He didn't have a grant. He didn't go with a government agency. He just said, I want to go to the bottom of the ocean. Kevin Costner, I want to solve this problem. And using their own resources, working with clever engineers, they came up with technologies that really can make a difference. So let's hope that we'll never have to deploy the machinery that Costner developed. But if the past is prelude or any clue, will be oil spills going forward.
Let's go back to the back.
The Union of Concerned Scientists has their famous clock, which they use to sort of depict the state of the world as they see it. I guess especially with regard to the nuclear threat. And I was just kind of curious to see if you could have a clock. Where would you put the hands 50 years ago, and where would you put the hands today?
Well, I'm a hopeaholic. I think we have choices. We can, if we let business continue along the track that it is on today, with some positive things happening, but not really. You know, we haven't made that real commitment to look for alternatives to fossil fuel. We have, but we haven't taken it all that seriously, not as if our lives depend on it, and our lives probably do, coming up with alternatives if we get really serious about it. We're not really serious about protecting the ocean in terms of, just stop killing the sharks. Why would we want to do this? What have sharks ever done to you other than keep the ocean healthy? I mean, there are a few people I know, they show me their shark bites, but, every once in a while a human gets nipped by a shark. Occasionally, they eat a human, but we eat millions of them a year. I think they're allowed one or two of us every once in a while.
Let's go here.
There is, where would I put those hands? I think it's an open question. We can maybe, in the best of all possible worlds, we will just sort of stop the clock toward the downward, this is the end, and sort of extend our future where it can be. Ed Wilson, a fellow hopeaholic, I guess. I think he said it many times, I've heard him talk about it, but if we can get through this tight spot that we're in right now, there is reason to think we can come to grips with how we feed people, but we have to respect nature as a fundamental key to going forward, to buy ourselves time. But we really have to hurry. I have said many times, and it's always true, that the next 10 years will be the most important in the next 10,000 years, because what we do or fail to do will make all the difference. And the longer we wait, the harder it's going to be. The sooner we get busy and take action that will secure a place for ourselves, the longer we have on that clock.
It's an analog answer, not a digital answer to the clock question. Yeah.
So I'm interested in what we can do as a community and as individuals. So what would you say are the most serious threats to the ocean right now? Is it offshore drilling, a carbon economy, other kinds of pollution? Is it species depletion? And sort of as an analog to that, what do you eat? I mean, I thought fish were sustainable, and I have my little list that I take to the supermarket. How much fish would you eat? How many times a week? Do you eat farmed fish? Are farmed fish okay?
A lot of big questions here.
A lot of. So, what do we do now?
The answer to the problems you listed is yes. They're all high priority questions. The biggest problem, it's lack of knowing. And that's a solvable problem. You cannot care if you don't know. And you can't act if you don't care. So it starts with knowing. It starts with institutions like this one, where there's a lot of knowing going on. But people need to take personal responsibility for educating themselves. How old is that fish on your plate? You should want to know that. You know, we don't eat lions and tigers or other carnivores by and large. I mean, some people do, but we can't feed billions of people with wildlife. We cannot do it with carnivores. We don't raise carnivores for food. Cows, chickens, pigs, all those things, they're all grazers. They're all fast-growing, low on the food chain. So either you eat plants or you eat animals that eat plants. Or today, we eat animals that eat fish because we take wildlife, wild fish, and we feed them to cows and chickens and pigs. How stupid is that? I mean, it looks like a good deal because the fish are free, right? You just go out and take them. But little pieces of your heart, of the systems that keep us alive, are going to feed our domesticated animals. We've got to stop that. We have to really account for the real cost of a piece of beef or chicken or whatever, and just don't take wildlife to feed to them. It's like taking eagles to feed to chickens, to take wild creatures and feed to chickens, which is what we're doing. And chickens don't really, I mean, if they had a choice, would they eat? They'd probably eat anything. Chickens are, they're like, well, they're dinosaurs, so they're with feathers, you know. But, so what do I eat? I have gone to from being a great lover of seafood. I grew up in a family, lobsters, you know, crabs, any kind of fish. But now I know. So I've just taken it off my menu. I just have. I can't because I know too much. I cannot. And it's partly because I care about the fish, I care about the ocean, which means I care about us. But the fish in the sea swim in you know what that we put in the sea, and it goes up the food chain. So the higher concentrations of the stuff that we put into the ocean are with the top carnivores like tuna, like swordfish, like most of the fish that we tend to eat, halibut and salmon. And no, I don't eat the cultivated salmon. I think it's a poor choice of fish to eat, to grow, because they're carnivores. You take this many wild fish to get this many cultivated fish. It's not a good, I mean, you couldn't run a business that way. You'd have more money going in than comes out the other end. And it just doesn't work. But we've got ourselves into a corner on that because we know how to raise salmon from eggs, and they taste good, and there's a market for it. So we kind of shove under the rug the real cost of the salmon. And the salmon, whether it's farmed or whether it's wild caught, they still have, I would sooner eat a farmed one than a wild caught one because they're so important out there in the ocean, these wild caught ones. I mean, they need to be part of the system that's working. We need to protect it. Anyway, so catfish, tilapia, carp, low in the food chain, fast growing, they're the true chicken of the sea, if you will. That because the pounds of plants to get to a pound of protein is about the same as chicken. 2 pounds of plants to make a pound of catfish, tilapia, or carp, roughly speaking. 20 pounds more or less to get a pound of year-old cow. How many pounds to make one of you? Think a 30-year-old orange roughy. It's this vast amount that's channeled down to one little fish, or let's say a rockfish that's been out there for 80 years that you can do in 20 minutes. What's the real cost to the system that's put into one little fish? Maybe it's only 50 years old, or maybe it's only 10 years old, but we don't raise 10-year-old chickens. If you want to feed a lot of people, we've got to use our bright minds about how do we have smart agriculture, smart aquaculture, smart eating habits. Jim Cameron has taken the pledge. He says, no more meat for me. It's better for me, and it's a lot better for the planet. So, who knows?
Long question, but most of it was answered there. Let's go back here.
Long answer, sorry.
Hi, thank you. Do you know if there's any hope for the plastic islands that are around the world that have collected? Is there any hope to actually clean them up?
You mean like the island of country of the Maldives or the Bahamas or whatever, those that low-lying islands that are seeing the consequences of sea level rise?
No,
I'm sorry, I missed
I
the-
use the term. I use
plastic. The floating island.
I forget what they're called. Pacific. Yeah, the gyres. Yeah. Do you know if
once
there's
it's in
been
the
any
ocean,
progress with that? Thank you.
It's really hard to get it out other than big stuff like the nets that those kids were taking out of the ocean and off the beaches. There was a girl, Linda Marinas, in Texas years ago, who was just so disgusted by all the plastic stuff. It wasn't just plastic, mostly plastic, that she started doing what now a lot of people are doing with a beach cleanup. And that's a really good thing to do, but you have to turn off the source. And plastic bags last a very long time. And it isn't just the bag intact, but when it breaks up, little pieces last a very long time, down to the molecular level, very durable. They get engulfed by things like oysters and clams and plankton and the things that eat the plankton, right up the food chain, you know. It's not just the plastic themselves, but it's the chemicals in the plastic that become a part of the system. I mean, think of the chemicals that are in all of you that didn't exist when your grandparents were kids. I mean, we live in a changed world owing to what we have made of it. And so far, so good, you know. We live, we breathe, but we're compromising some of the things that we could do better if we understand the consequences. In the ocean, you know, there are some prizes being offered. How do we get that plastic out of the ocean? Is there some kind of a plastic magnet? It'll concentrate it and bring it out of the ocean. It's a real problem. I think get out of the ocean what we can and stop the source and try to come to grips with the fact that we've got a permanently altered ocean because of what we've put into it and what we've taken out of it.
I think we have a question in front here. Yes.
Well, we're all very concerned, obviously, about the animals that you showed us. Could you speak about the effect on phytoplankton as the base of the food chain and generation of oxygen?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can lament the big drop in tunas and swordfish and turtles and whales and all that, but at least one study suggests that phytoplankton since the 1950s has dropped by 40%. Maybe it's only 20%. Maybe it's 10%, but it's not good news. You know, you can look at the land and see we've cut rainforests, you can measure it, you can see it from satellites, but it's harder to actually look at the ocean because we've only begun to look at that level. It was 1986 when Penny Chisholm, an MIT scientist, and some of her colleagues discovered Prochlorococcus, this tiny little blue-green bacterium that it now turns out it's not just one species, it's a host of related blue-green, well, bacteria that generate 20% of the oxygen in the atmosphere. Roughly 1 in every 5 breaths you take from that one kind, that one category of phytoplankton, and then there are all those others that, along with kelp and seagrasses and the other plankton in the ocean, about 70% is the likely figure. It's a very slippery figure. Some say, oh, it's more than half. Some say it's more than 70%, but whatever it is, you don't want to mess up what it takes to make you breathe.
We have time for, I think, 2 more questions. We have one in the back.
I was sort of stunned by the idea that people are not allowed to drive submarines down to the site of the BP wellhead. And are there other places like that in the ocean where corporations are preventing scientists from going? And if that is the case, is it time maybe for scientists to do a little civil disobedience to get the information we need?
Well, one thing that is on the horizon, actually it's underway right now, is deep sea mining. And leases are being let by some countries, and this country is getting in there too. The mines from which we extract metals and other minerals on the land often have a deep sea origin. You know, continents have moved around, and what's above water was once below water, and vice versa. So there have actually been clear evidence of these deep sea tube worms associated with modern mines, fossilized, of course. So we know that there are metals in the deep sea crusts and around these hydrothermal vents. And until right about now, the cost of extracting them has really put a stop to serious extraction of metals, whether it's manganese nodules or the crusts or whatever. But right now, we're on the cusp of the beginning of a grab, if you will. And nations, Cook Islands, has been looking at this now for decades because the whole northern part of their exclusive economic zone is rich with these crusts, as well as manganese nodules that look promising economically now for the first time, because for the first time we have the technology that enable us to get to the deep sea. But just as with oil and gas, we're not accounting for the real cost. And they're looking at doing the whatever it takes to extract the metals at sea and putting the tailings back into the ocean, which is just not a good idea. But it's hard to, unless we express our concern about this, not just within the exclusive economic zones of countries such as Papua New Guinea, that is working with a Canadian-based company called Nautilus to undertake this. So once a company has a vested interest, an economic investment, they're going to defend that territory, if you will, and try to not let others come and be a part of, to inspect or look at it. It's just the way things are. I don't know of a specific example comparable to the Deepwater Horizon, but just stand by in the Arctic or stand by with other activities that are right on the edge. I'm particularly concerned about where we now can see the future with deep sea mining.
Our last question here.
My question has to do with what you're talking about with Edward O. Wilson and the respect of nature. And although I do agree with that, and growing up in California, I was able to see that. What do we say to the families that don't have the resources that we have and can respect nature, and their only income is someone finning sharks in their family and stuff like that? What do we do about that? And I see it as analogous to the bushmeat problem, but I don't know if you've implicitly answered it, but what do you have to say about that?
I couldn't quite understand the full question, but I think you're asking about feeding people who have no choices about what to eat.
Yeah.
And like bushmeat, it's a good word, excuse me, to describe wildlife in the sea. It's all bushmeat. It is bushmeat. Like, chimpanzees or whatever. Excuse me. I think we're talking about two kinds of taking from the sea. The communities that have few choices, feeding their families, feeding their communities. If they're careful and don't take the last fish from the reef, and typically, looking back over time, the island cultures understand they can't take fish all the time, and they also understand that the breeding seasons need to be protected. You don't disturb a grouper when it's making more grouper. You let them do their thing so you can have grouper in the future. And there are actually policies that you can read about, although we can't experience them today, in a number of the island cultures, Hawaii notably. I mean, other island cultures like Easter Island had no such policies, and they just consumed their way out of existence. But knowing, and you really, if you're sensitive to how much you can take, then the idea of sustainability within limits, using wildlife as your source of sustenance, can work. But again, you have to be smart about it. And you can't consider what is happening, for example, in the Galapagos, where the argument is made there will allow local fishing. Fine, if it were just local fishing, but the fish that they take from the Galapagos Islands get marketed in Ecuador. The fish they take from the Galapagos Islands go to Japan. The sea cucumbers go to China. The lobsters come to the United States. It's not a matter of taking these wild creatures for sustenance, it's getting it for money to buy the thing. So it's a step away. I mean, you are getting money so that you can buy something, but I think your question relates to what about the communities in Africa where they really do rely or have relied for ages on what they can catch locally, and whether it's from the forest or whether it's from the ocean. If our numbers are small and wildlife is large, we can get away with taking some. But if we're going to sustain 7 billion people, we have to think of alternatives. And even for small coastal communities, now that we know that in a pond you can grow protein, tilapia, or whatever it is, don't let it escape into your local rivers, but keep it under wraps, closed systems. You can get a lot of sustenance in a small space. The Island School in the Bahamas has a great aquaculture, agriculture, figure eight, where they're growing fish, tilapia in this case. The nutrified water goes to support hydroponics for vegetables, lettuce, tomatoes, and other things. And then the cleansed water goes back to the fish. Now that we know, we can supply alternatives to these island nations where, they have a long history of taking from the sea, and they can probably get away, we can always get away with taking some until you get down to the last few percentage, and then you protect them because you don't want them to disappear. And we're at that stage right now with so many species that once were really abundant when we were not so abundant, that it's shifted now. And I'm encouraged because island nations are looking more toward how can we treat the ocean in ways that we can sort of have our fish and eat them too, And that's the key, using the knowledge that we now have to try to strike that balance and get it right.
That's great. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.